Good afternoon. This is the video on memory. I'm going to just jump right in because I only have 15 minutes. Here's a Wordle depicting words associated with memory. So what is memory? Memory is our ability to encode, to store, retain, and then later recall information and past experiences. Encoding, in case you're wondering, takes place after perception, and it's the first step in creating new memory. So the perceived item of interest is converted into a mental representation that can be stored in our brains. That's what we mean by encode. What does memory allow us to do? Well, memory allows us to use what we have learned and what we've experienced in the past to shape our current actions and behavior and guide our future actions. So memory gives us the capability to learn and adapt from previous experiences. In a way, it helps us be more successful going forward because we've learned from our past experiences. There are 3 types of memory. We'll talk about each of those in a moment. The first one is sensory memory, and then the short-term memory processes. Those are broken down into immediate memory and active working memory. And then there's long-term memory, which actually also has 2 components, which we'll see in just a moment. So here's a graphic for those who like to have a picture. And we'll talk about those elements in just a moment. So the first memory system, if you will, is sensory memory. And the first step in creating a memory is perception. So a stimulus, or what we want to remember, must first be perceived by our senses. If that doesn't happen, we're not going to be able to make a memory. Sensory memory is what allows that perception, so the pattern, the image, a sound that you've heard, something that you've felt or touched, it allows it to linger after that stimulation is over or has stopped or disappeared or whatever, gone from view. It's our sensory memory that allows that perception to linger, just briefly, but it does linger. What do you think could interfere with a student's sensory memory? Well, if a student has problems with language-mediated tasks due to language problems, then the information learned may not be correctly represented in that student's sensory memory. And so, of course, there's the domino effect, and it's going to interfere with the student's ability to remember. How long can you hold those little bits or chunks of information in sensory memory? It's very brief, as the reading said. It's really just milliseconds to seconds. Very brief. All right, the second memory system is short-term memory. And as we said, that is has 2 parts. The first one is immediate memory. And what is the role of immediate memory? It allows us to hold information in our heads long enough for us to make connections to it or add to it. Make connections or add to it. Or just forget it, of course, if it's not important. How many bits of information can we hold in our immediate memory? They used to think that it was 7 plus or minus 2. And that's why telephone numbers were 7 digits long. But more recently, researchers are coming to the conclusion that it's actually really just 4 chunks of information. How long can you hold those bits of information in your immediate memory? About 20 to 30 seconds, half a minute, and then it's gone unless you do something with it. The second aspect, of short-term memory is active working memory. And this is where conscious processing takes place. So you're really working with that information, facts, whatever it is that you're encountering. So the role of active working memory is, this is where new information is compared with old information that you've already learned. And working memory holds information long enough so that you can employ strategies to help you remember it. And there are lots of different strategies that you can do, such as verbal rehearsal. That's like when we hear somebody's phone number, we repeat it over and over in our mind. Or let's say your locker combination, you repeat it over and over to help yourself remember it. Think about school-related tasks and working memory. How do you think working memory could affect a student's reading or success with math? We'll talk about that in class. How long can information be held on to in active working memory? Well, you can think of it as a temporary way station. So it lasts for a little while, but it's not permanent. We can retain information in our active working memory for minutes, hours, and even days if you have elaborated on the information. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit too. Something to keep in mind though is even though the information is available for a little while, for example, when you cram for a test, it won't necessarily move into your long-term memory. And that's why, 3 months later, somebody asks you a question that you aced. You aced that information on the test, and you can't even remember what it was. And that's because it's just gone. What factors would affect your immediate memory and active working memory? There are 4, and this is from research again. First one is your interest in the topic. If you are interested in that topic, you are much more likely to remember it and get it into your active working memory. Your intent to remember, your understanding of the concepts. So if you didn't understand it well, you're not going to be able to remember it. And then the last one is your prior knowledge of the topic, and that's because you already have a lot of information in your memory about that topic, and so you can just kind of fit that in with what you already know. Types of problems with short-term memory. First one is attentional dysfunction. You must first be paying attention in order to properly encode that information in your memory. Weak processing. Perhaps you haven't really fully thought about it and kind of figured out what it's really about. If you haven't figured that out, you will not be able to remember it. Weak paraphrasing skills. Paraphrasing is really an art, and is being able to kind of sift through all that information that perhaps you've read or learned about and figuring out what is the essence of that information. How can I kind of articulate that in a clear, direct way? That's paraphrasing. And then failure to use memory strategies. If you don't use strategies to remember, it's going to be gone. The third system is long-term memory. And this, we're talking about memories that are retained for longer than 24 hours. What do you think is the most important factor in determining whether a series of facts or information will be transferred to your long-term memory? That factor is if that information has personal meaning to you. if it's personally relevant to you, you are much more likely to retain it in your long-term memory. Here's another graphic. So you can see long-term memory broken into two components: explicit memory, which is declarative memories; implicit memory, which is about non-declarative memories. And then those are broken down even further. Some examples of each. So declarative, we've got I know that, and he's got some facts that he knows. The even numbers end with 0, 2, 4, 6, etc. Procedural memory, an example is I know how to do something, and in this case it's to pronounce and comprehend new vocabulary. And then episodic knowledge, this is I remember when. And so this is memory for events that have taken place in your life, and you're able to talk about those memories. And in some ways you almost go back in time and kind of recall the details of what happened at that event. All right, so long-term memory we said was two types. There was non-declarative and then declarative. So non-declarative, these include conditioned responses. So you're conditioned to remember. And a tip for teachers to tap this type of memory content or skill is learned through repetition. So the teacher can create songs with that information embedded, like as the words to the songs. The teacher can use metaphors and repeat those to help the student remember. Non-declarative memories also include procedural memory. These are skills. So it's also referred to as muscle memory, and the tip for the teacher here is incorporate movement. It also includes non-motor procedures, such as memorizing and learning the steps in a math problem. First you do this, then you do that, and there's a logical sequence that you have to follow. And the third element of non-declarative memory is emotional memory, and that is the most powerful memory system for humans. And what the teacher can do is try and personalize learning. Tell stories. Have the students put on debates where a group of students presents one side and the other group presents the other side, the pros and cons, okay? Or he said, she said. Have students engage in role-playing to take on the persona of historical figures. They'll be much better able to remember it if you do. The second type of long-term memory is declarative memory. And we're talking about memory here for facts and figures that can be discussed. And you can kind of see the word declare and declarative. Effort is required in order to remember. These are not memories that are just going to pop into your mind. We have to try and remember. Declarative memory relies heavily on your short-term and working memory. And of course, it's the kind of memory most needed in school. So if you've got short-term memory problems, you're going to have challenges remembering everything that we want you to learn in school. All right, that is it for memory. I know it was fast, but you can certainly watch the video again and take notes if you like. And I'll see you in class.